Hello everybody. Today we're going to look at Azure Storage Accounts, the setup and the first encounter things you need to know about how to use these things in Azure. So let's have a look at a bit of a diagram first about how Azure Storage Accounts actually function and what they do. If you are using things at home, like for example OneDrive or Dropbox, you might be used to the concept of cloud storage. Azure Storage Accounts works a bit like that, but with a different way of actually accessing it. An actual Azure Storage Account, when we go and build one inside Azure itself, can do a number of different things. I should actually spell that correctly, shouldn't I? Storage account can do a number of different things. In fact, it can store things in a number of different ways. It can store blob storage. Blob is binary large object. That means anything. Blob could be a text file, JPEG, AVI. It doesn't matter. It's just blob, binary large object. Everything's binary if you look at it eventually. You've got file storage. File storage is where you can actually advertise out SMB file shares. This is quite useful. You can also do NFS shares now in file storage. You can do table storage, which is very basic hash tables of information. Think of it like a table inside a SQL database. Sometimes you just need a table. You don't need a full database. Storage accounts can provide that for you. And queue storage as well. Not that crazy QAnon stuff. But queue storage is the same equivalent as RabbitMQ and other queue services you might find when you're writing code. The queue storage within storage accounts is incredibly basic. It works perfectly fine, but we won't be covering it here right now. What we're actually going to be focusing on today, on a basic level for how this stuff functions, is blob storage, or binary large object storage. So inside a storage account, when you go and build one of these things, and you go and create a storage account, by default, the storage account itself, you can create something inside here called containers. Now, when using blob storage, binary large object, they don't call it blob inside the interface anymore. They call it container storage. Okay. Now, this container storage, it's a folder. That's literally all you can really think about it as. So if you go and create a folder underneath here, a container underneath here called something like fruit, and you actually start to pop things inside here, like for example images. So if you take something like an apple.jpg, and you take something like a pear.jpg and just drop those straight in there, this is essentially like a folder. There is a very big caveat on this. You cannot have containers inside containers. You can only have one level of containers. Okay. Now, the interface to the storage account and how we actually retrieve things from it, you can talk to it through a number of different services, but the easiest way of actually hitting one of these storage accounts is directly with HTTPS. Okay. You can hit a storage account with the REST API if you really want to, and you can go and pull that information out very quickly. Easily. So let's go and build one of these storage accounts. Let's go and load some pictures into it. Let's go and talk about some of the extra services within those storage accounts and how that wizard kind of sets up. It's always going to be easier to see it. So I'm here in my Azure environment, and if I go into my resource groups here, I'm going to create a new resource group. I'm going to create this one called temp, and this is just going to live in UK South. If I create that, I already have a name for that. Let's call this temp storage. Let's go and review and create that again. There we go. Okay, so if I head to this resource group, I have nothing inside it at the moment. Let's build a storage account and let's go and have a look at some of the information inside the wizard and some of the options that we have for our storage accounts. So I have a number of storage accounts here already. Of course, resources, a randomly generated storage account that was for my Cloud Shell. Might do a video on Cloud Shell at some point as well. My pictures backup, Mike's Big Data, which is not very big. There's a joke in there somewhere, but we'll skim over that for the moment. And a storage account that was created temporarily for my Mike's site, my static website. So I'm going to build a new one in here. I'm going to make sure that this is going to live inside that temp resource group, or that temp storage resource group. Now, I'm going to give the storage account a name. This is really, really important. We're going to call this YouTube demo. Now, that's probably going to be taken. This actually has to be Mike demo. Let's go for Mike demo storage. Hopefully that will be unique. Oh, Mike demo storage temp. In fact, Mike demo storage March. Or March. Well, not in March. October. Right. So this account name has to be unique inside Azure. That's because the access that you actually have to the storage account via HTTPS actually comes over a URL. Now that URI, or URL, is going to link to the name of the storage account itself. You'll see this later on when we access the data that we put inside our storage account directly over the internet. Now I'm going to choose what region I want to put this in. I'm just going to pop this straight into UK South, down here somewhere. It would be nice if Microsoft organized these lists alphabetically, but they don't. So we will go for UK South here. Now, number of options you've got within storage accounts and things to kind of explain here. The performance level. Standard or premium. You go premium, you go faster, it'll cost you more money. Okay? Quite simply that. Also, you actually have a couple of other options here in regards to block blobs and page blobs. If you look into the documentation, this is different types of storage you're telling Azure, different types of data you might be storing inside your storage account, and you're essentially saying to Azure, look, we're going to have lots of big files or we're going to have lots of little files. You might want to adjust that storage to give us the best possible performance. If we stick with standard though, which is going to work for 99.9% of people out here, your upper limits I think are 2 petabytes. So there's quite a lot of headroom here to store, but you've also got this redundancy in here. LRS, GRS, ZRS, and GZRS. Okay, so this is quite important to actually choose, because the more redundancy you have, the more money you're going to spend. Pretty straightforward. Go faster, it's going to cost you more. More redundancy, it's going to cost you more. It's kind of how it works. Now, this LRS, GRS, ZRS, and GZRS look a bit like this. So, with locally redundant storage, your data is redundant, but it's redundant across racks and it's redundant across hard drives. So, you protect against server failure, protect against hard drive failure, but you're not protected against data center failure in an Azure region. Zone redundant storage comes with a much higher SLA attached to it, and zone redundant moves multiple copies into multiple different availability zones within the same primary region. So you're protected against data center failure. But say, for example, if Putin does get a bit itchy with his trigger finger on the old red button, and you lose a whole region, you might lose your data. I think we've probably got bigger problems at that point, but still, moving on. Scrolling down a little bit more, we've also got this concept of geo-redundant. This is when you have 2 completely different data center regions, so UK South, UK West, and you've got multiple copies in each. You've actually got 6 copies of your data inside 2 different regions. Massive amounts of redundancy here. Okay, pretty cool. And the final one is geo-zone redundant, where you've got multiple zones and you've got a secondary region as well. So this is starting to get quite expensive, but the level of redundancy is ridiculously high. You are not losing data within here at all. Okay, so that's just the storage redundancy article on the Azure documentation. So if we drop back to my wizard over here, I'm going to choose LRS because I'm going to be cheap. Now, what's interesting about those different redundancy options is that it doesn't matter which one I choose. Whichever one I choose, I will interact with that storage account in exactly the same way. So that's kind of cool. Now, there's a heck of a lot of options down here. We're going to skim over some of them, okay? We'll come back to them later, some of these options in another video after we've done some setup. To do this demo, what I'm going to need to do is enable public access from all networks. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm exposing this storage account out to the outside world, essentially like an open directory. Okay, so I'm not going to restrict access to it. I'm going to come through here, skim past things like the soft delete for blobs. I do recommend you have that one turned on. If I'm going to mention anything in this wizard in this video, that is the one you want turned on. This is the essentially, oh dear, I messed up button. Because if you delete something inside a storage account, it will not be deleted for 7 days. You can go back in and restore it. You can go up to, I think, 180 days on that. You might want to check the documentation. So encryption type, what this means, Microsoft Managed Key, Customer Managed Key. If you are unsure, do not change that to Customer Managed Key. You will have a bad time. Okay, the quick result for that, or the quick explanation for that, sorry, is that a Microsoft Managed Key means that your data is encrypted on a drive inside Microsoft's data centers. If somebody picks up a hard drive and walks out of the data center with your data on it, they cannot access it. That's great. But it's a Microsoft Managed Key, so Microsoft technically have access to your data, but there's a lot of management layers to go through with that, okay? For some people, that might not work from a compliance perspective, and you can choose a customer managed key. With the customer managed key, you can hold your own encryption keys. To do that, you're going to need some hardware security modules inside your local office. I do not suggest you do that unless your compliance says that you have to. The reason is, if you are in control of your keys and you screw it up, you're going to have a very bad time because you're not getting your data back. Okay, leave it in Microsoft's hands, because let's be honest, they're doing a better job. We can tag this. I'm not going to bother at the moment, and I'm going to review and create this storage account. Now, some things in Azure take a very long time to actually build, some things do not. This one here, the Mic Demo Storage October account, does not. What I'm going to be able to do after this is interact with this storage account. In fact, we can interact with this storage account in actually a number of different ways and actually control it in a number of different ways. We could actually send this thing commands. So we could send it PowerShell commands. We could send it Azure CLI commands. We could actually send this thing REST API commands if we really want to. We can actually go and interact with this via the Azure portal, which is good. We could also interact with this via a desktop program called Storage Explorer. There we go. We could also interact with this via the AZ copy utility as well. So there's actually a number of different ways we can hit the storage account. In fact, there's quite a bit to this subject. We just need to see here that our deployment has been completed and we can go to that resource. So again, buttons upon buttons upon buttons. Okay, so much stuff down here, guys. You're not going to learn it all. Don't worry about doing that though. But if we have a general idea of what this thing does and how it functions, we should be able to start our journey to learning more about storage when we find a need for it. So we'll notice this is called locally redundant. This is a locally redundant storage account. That's fine. And this is in UK South and it's on performance standard. It's got all the fun stuff that I've selected. Now, what I'm worried about here is this, the data storage section, containers, file shares, queues, and tables. So to really get started, I need to jump into containers, which used to be called Blob, but Microsoft renamed stuff because they like to rename stuff. I'm going to create a container here called fruit. So fruit helps if I can type today. So the public access level, this is going to be defining on who can actually see this over the internet. And I'm going to provide this currently with container level, which is anonymous read access for containers and blobs. Essentially, I am literally creating a public directory here. Okay. So if I go into this fruit container, notice I cannot create another container. Remember, only one level of containers. Unless you do something called a data lake when you can have hierarchical storage. But that's another talk for another time. What I want to do now is I want to put some stuff into this container. And I've got some stuff. So yeah, basically, behold my stuff. And what my stuff is actually going to be here is something very, very simple. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up here and I'm going to grab these two images. In fact, you know what I'm going to do first? I'm going to rename these images to pear and apple right here. Okay, I'm just going to grab both of those and I'm going to upload them straight into my storage account. Really quick, really easy. To be honest, when I say really quick, it's not. If you're going to upload hundreds of gigabytes or even terabytes worth of stuff, you do not want to be doing that through the web browser. You want to use something like Storage Explorer to do it, or you want to use AZ Copy to do it. I will do additional videos on those topics later on. But in the meantime, if you want to look it up, AZ Copy or Storage Explorer, this is just a quick and dirty method. Okay, so what we will see here is an apple.jpg and a pear.jpg. Cool. So if we look at apple.jpg, we can actually see on the edit of it, there is a picture of an apple. Wonderful. I wonder what I'm going to get when I go to pear. If I click on edit, I get a picture of a pear. Great. Okay, that's not what we're too bothered about. We're bothered about this. This is how we can actually see it. If we go and copy this to a clipboard and throw up a notepad really quickly, you can see that is the URL to access this file. So we're accessing the file directly over the internet. There's no concept of browsing it like a OneDrive or a Dropbox or something along those lines. Remember, these are storage accounts designed to store things for applications, or maybe even for web applications themselves. So this is called Mike Demo Storage October.blob.core.windows.net /fruit/apple.jpg. Wonderful. If I just go and grab that URL and throw that directly up here, boom, there we go. There is the apple.jpg. Okay. And I could store whatever files I actually wanted in here. Wouldn't really matter. One of the use cases that I've used, one of these, in fact, multiple use cases that I've used a storage account before. I'll give you one very quick example. There is a static website set up here called MikeSite. It is a very sort of cheap and dirty demo site, but I have a couple of useful links on here, which is an old version of the Microsoft whiteboard, because at one point Microsoft released an update that screwed it up and I needed the old version. And there's something called showdown.zip, which is just some scripts for my Showdown demos. And I can add additional things to that. This is just a static website. There's nothing particularly special about it. But both of these, you will see, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, are links to one of my storage accounts. So coming back, we took a quick look at Azure Storage Accounts. We did an initial setup, an initial first encounter. We took a look at the redundancy of those storage accounts, and we interacted with one of these storage accounts via HTTPS. We uploaded some data to it, and then we went and accessed that data. Thanks for listening. This completes the Azure Storage Accounts basics, and we will continue on next time with more detailed information about things we can do with Azure and storage accounts.